All right, so good evening, everybody. Welcome to Agile Hartford's October event. Hey, Steve, are we still? Do people still collect PDUs? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
All right, so as you can see, we're part of the Scrum Alliance, Scrum User Group, Agile Alliance, and the Agile Leadership Network. So if you're collecting PDUs, need any proof for those, let us know. Oh, come on. There we go. There's the illustrious board. It doesn't look like Larry's here tonight. Steve, Janet, Vin, and myself. Larry couldn't join us tonight. About 7 o'clock tonight, you'll get a survey. An email's going to go out. So you'll have a survey in your inbox. If you could please do us a favor, reflect on this evening's event and give us some feedback. I think there's some room for comments there too. Or there's things you want to hear about, people you want to see here. Maybe leave us a comment on that. We'd appreciate that feedback on what you might like in the future as well. And then we'll pop a QR code up at the end as well, so you'll be able to snap that and get into there. Where are you going to find us? You can find us at agilehartford.org, our Gmail address, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. So we've been recording our events since we're all virtual, and we've been publishing them out there on YouTube. So if you missed one or have to leave early, you can go out there and look for Agile Hartford, and you'll find us out there. Okay, and tonight our sponsor for this evening is Slalom. I believe Jamie's here. Hey, Jamie.
Hi. All right, thanks. My buddy Dave K asked me to take a minute to talk about Slalom. If any of you have never heard of us before, I'm Jamie Diglio. I'm a senior director here at Slalom, and you can tell from my window, right? So I remember where I am. So we have any Ted Lasso fans here? All right. So I often, most recently, actually, I've been saying Slalom's a little bit like Ted Lasso. You either love us or you've never heard of us. But we're a modern consulting firm. I'm part of the team with Dave here in the Hartford market. When we say modern, is we do everything from technology consulting all the way through to strategy consulting. But our difference is how we focus on everything through a lens of experience. What's the experience we're designing for our customer, our customers' customers, and we deliver everything in an agile way. We're about 10,000 people strong now. We're in 36 markets. We're global, but we feel really local because we have this unique model where we're in these smaller markets, so we can scale up and we can scale down. And yeah, so that's a little bit about Slalom. I'll put my contact information in the chat. If you have any questions about Slalom, reach out. And if you haven't watched Ted Lasso, you should give it a try. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Jamie. Good advice on both accounts. All right, a little bit of what's coming up. So the rest of the year, we've got Derek Lane coming next month in November. How do you know how agile you really are? Some of you might remember Derek from, I think it was earlier this year. Was it just this year? He released his 20-day agility challenge to coincide with the 20-year anniversary of the Agile Manifesto. So Derek will be with us in November. December is our in-person live event at City Steam with Bob Ellis from Eliason Group. That one, unfortunately, because of restrictions, is going to be limited seating. So we'll have 75 tickets, and when those are gone, those are gone. However, we're experimenting with something new. I bought a cool little fun iPhone gimbal, and we're going to try and see how live streaming works. So hopefully for those that don't register soon enough, you'll still be able to experience it and hopefully be able to contribute to that as well. Otherwise, we'll definitely have it recorded and you can watch it after that. And then December 15th will be Dave West. Is he CEO, CIO? What is his role? He's with scrum.org, right? Increasing the velocity of value. So that'll be in December. We're doing that with our affinity group, Agile Rhode Island. So for this evening, We have actually a dynamic duo of speakers. We have Dan Gallagher. He is also with Slalom, senior principal in delivery leadership with Slalom. And Dan's coming here tonight with about 30 years experience in product roles, product manager, product owner, product designer, product executive, product consultant. This product, I think Dan's done it. And he really believes life's way too short to build products that people just won't use. So he'll be sharing some of that tonight. And then Becky's joining him as well. She is also with Slalom, a senior consultant in the Agile practice. And she leads the product owner coaching offering we have at Slalom. So it's maybe for new product owners or product owners kind of struggling, making progress in that space to build better products. So she brings 8 years experience as an actual product owner to that role. So Dan and Gallagher, Dan and Becky, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I am going to share. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
You're good.
Definitely.
Yes.
So if someone can let me know if I can't see the chat while I'm presenting. So if there are questions or anything like that, feel free to interrupt, or if someone wants to chime in, if there's something in the chat, please let Becky or I know. So we're going to walk through this, but feel free to interrupt us as questions come up. So what we want to talk about tonight is the original name of this was Stop Building the Wrong Things Faster, Reversing the Curse of Agile. But that kind of pissed off some Agilists as we started doing it. So we've altered the name to a more Agile friendly name. But really what we have found at Slalom, we've done a lot of really impactful, really well executed Agile transformations. And we leave and we keep those relationships with those customers. And we find out they actually do what they find is they build the wrong things faster. So what we really have done, and what I've done throughout my career, is we focus in on, we talk about Agile delivery, but how do you do Agile discovery? How do you do Agile at the pace, Agile discovery at the pace of Agile? And it's led to a methodology that we've really perfected over the years, particularly at Slalom in the past 3 or 4 years. So, that's. Strange to jump around. So what we want, first of all, while Becky and I introduce ourselves, if you want to grab your phone, Becky, do you want to talk about this Menti?
Sure. So we just have a quick Menti, if you don't mind filling it out, just to kind of understand what role you play at your organization, so we can kind of understand who's here tonight and tailor the presentation on the spot for you.
Yeah, we do, and that will help us as we go through where to double click and drill in on as well. I'll leave this up for a minute, but David kind of gives a quick overview. Yeah, I have been doing product longer than I care to remember. And believe me, if there's a way to build products wrong, I've done it every which way but loose. They say, and we'll get to this in a minute, about 70% of products and features built and launched are seldom or never used. And we're going to get into why that is, but that's really one of the ways that I started really looking at how can Agile help there. I looked at Agile early on in the early 2000s, even though I wasn't working at companies that were using it as a development method. The idea of inspecting and adapting and evolving rapidly really worked in product discovery. And so I started doing that and working over time. And as Agile became more ubiquitous, the ability to align this continuous discovery with continuous Agile delivery has really kind of pulled together. And we've been able to help a lot of clients start building the right things at the pace of Agile. And Becky, did you want to do a quick intro as well?
Sure. Hi, I'm Becky Kailus. I'm a principal in Slalom in our Boston market. And as Dave kind of said at the beginning, I created and lead our product owner one training. And when I'm not delivering that for our clients, I'm using the techniques that hopefully you'll learn tonight to act as a product owner for our clients to help them deliver impactful products.
Thanks, Becky. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the approach that we've developed, create some context and talk about it. And then Becky's going to talk specifically about how the role of a product owner and other roles within a product team change and evolve under this new way of thinking, which is really a product mindset that evolves at the pace of Agile. So I just kind of mentioned this. If the number that Jeff Patton. Anyway, in his book, the father of user story mapping, talks about 64% of software features are seldom or rarely ever used. So if you look at that from the perspective of in 2019, the estimated value, an estimated amount of money spent on software development worldwide was $457 billion. So 64% of that really looks like this. That's $274 billion that was spent on software that never should have been built. If you read on Patton's numbers, he claims that about 20% of what is built never should have been built and actually set the product back. So not only did it not do nothing, it actually hurt the product away from its objective. So that's a significant amount of waste. And we want to kind of drill into how to make that not happen. So some of you may be familiar with Hendrik Nyberg. He did a great video on product ownership, probably like almost 7 or 8 years ago. It's on YouTube. It's like 15 minutes. And he does this great sketchy style as he talks about what the role of a product owner is. And in that video, he sketched off to the side some concentric circles, talked about 3 forces: build the right thing, build the thing right, and build the thing fast. And he quickly goes on to talk about how if you only focus on 2 of the 3, what's going to happen is you're not going to get where you want to be. And he paints a compelling picture. But really what we've found is that when you look at them through this type of lens, this concentric circle, you really think about it from balancing. And he encourages you to find the balance. The problem with balance is means you take from one and give to the other to seek some kind of mythical equilibrium. So that if you want to build the right thing, you need to slow down because you're taking from build the thing fast. In actuality, and we'll get into this, faster, if you're moving faster, you're creating more opportunities for feedback, more opportunities to pivot and to learn. So it's not so much looking at through the lens of the concentric circle. So put a pin in that for a second. And let's look at a high-level value stream.
Dan, your audio is going out a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it kind of goes in and out a tiny bit. We're seeing that in the chat.
Okay, I'll move closer. If it keeps happening, let me know, and I will switch to headphones. But you can hear me okay right now?
You're going out a little bit.
Is that any better?
I think that's a little better.
Okay, I'll keep going, and if it keeps happening, I will find some headphones. It's just not really available. So if we look at it from the idea of there's an idea and then there's some sort of outcome, there's a value that's going to manifest itself in the market. And there's a high level value stream where there's pieces along the way. There's a vision, there's a plan, there's design, there's the delivery, and then something's deployed. There's hopefully some kind of validation and then a launch. What we want to talk about is that the fact that the outcome is what really matters. Agile tends to focus in on delivery. The ability to inspect and adapt doesn't usually extend beyond this focus of delivery on the value stream. So what about when you planning and validating? What about when you're, how does the vision and the launch tie together? And that's really what we like to look at. So where an agile transformation focuses on delivery, a product agility transformation really focuses on the other aspects that go into building. a great product. The outcomes over outputs is one of the ways that we start to center around what to build. So we'll talk about this more, but rather than starting with the idea, and let's face it, the ideas that are usually picked are usually the ideas of the highest paid person. Rather than starting with the idea, why not start with the outcome and work backwards towards the idea? How do you do that? How do you make that executable? And to do that, you're going to embrace a lot of uncertainty. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty, a lot of experimentation needs to happen. So how do you do that in an effective and impactful way? So as I talked about with Nyberg's kind of 3 forces that need to, as he said, balance, we look at these through a different lens. If you look at build the thing fast and build the thing right, that's really what Agile delivery is all about. I know if Agile Manifesto talks about building the right thing, but really what Agile measures is things like velocity, story points per sprint, things that are measuring how fast you're cranking out outputs. They don't really measure outcomes. And that's what we really want to focus on, because outcomes is the reason anyone's using your product. It's an important point. People aren't using your product because they want to use your product. People are using your product because they expect an outcome. So how do you, and as soon as someone else comes along who creates that outcome better, faster, cheaper, then they're gone. They're going to that other product because they're not loyal to your product. They're loyal to the outcome. So build the thing fast, build the right thing. That's what we call continuous discovery. It isn't sitting down and writing a spec and then throwing it over the wall. It's doing something, learning, making quick pivots, adaptations, learning more, pivoting. That's what continuous discovery is all about. As you pay attention and learn along the way, you're validating. So build the thing right, build the right thing is a validation process. So this, rather than sitting as stagnant concentric circles, is really a cycle. It's a powerful cycle. Agile delivery is driving continuous discovery, which is driving continuous validation, which then informs what's delivered next. And that's what we look at as product agility. It's an all-encompassing cycle that drives you towards what you need to build. So when you think about it, what we're really talking about is starting with the outcome and having that outcome drive and evolve and shape what the ideas end up being. So to kind of make this real, Becky's going to talk about a fictional company called Nuber that I'll let her explain what they do.
Thanks, Dan. So Nuber is a peer-to-peer transportation company whose vision is to make transportation as ubiquitous as running water. So at Nuber, we have Carol, who's a chief product officer and leadership more widely at Nuber, and she's decided to take a new approach using product agility at her organization. So with this mindset shift, product owners like Joanna transform from being responsive and sometimes submissive to the business needs to being catalytic in the way that they spark and sustain problem solving for customers. But product owners are also catalysts for enabling this mindset shift. The Scrum team to grow beyond order takers to being experimentative, collaborating with the product owner on innovating and finding new ways to solve the problems that are important to the product owner and the customer. In this new way of working, stakeholders, which in this case Emily, are no longer the potentially unreceptive order giver to the product owner's requirement taker, but instead stakeholders collaborate with the product owner, providing industry and operational expertise, but empowering the product owner to make the best decisions for the customer. And finally, we have leadership, and they have a mindset shift as well. So in the past, leadership was focused on delivery status, meeting budgets, hitting milestones. But in this new model, Carol and her team will be engaged in providing an environment and a culture that promotes failing fast, experimentation, and collaboration in order to truly develop innovative products.
Thanks, Becky. And what we've really been focused on at Slalom in particular in these engagements, it's as much about a mindset shift and a product mindset. And really what we're talking about here, what Becky's introducing, is that there's a real shift in mindset in the way everyone goes about doing their job. And we've, after many engagements, have found there are 7 real steps to making this happen. And we're just going to walk through them really quickly. The first step is we talked about starting with the outcome and having that drive the ideas. You need to identify what the outcomes are. What are the objectives you're trying to accomplish? OKRs, you hear those numbers. How much consensus is there around what those are? How well communicated are they? So the first step is identifying outcomes, the outcomes you want. But what we find as we step in these engagements is most people don't even understand the difference between an outcome and an output. This is Forrester's definition. An outcome is an end state that can be verified through measurable results. It's tied to a funded top-level initiative, which means it's important. It matters to the organization. It's defined through the lens of the people ultimately accountable for its end state. Basically, the cast of characters that are just on the screen really are active participants in defining what the outcome is. Their expertise is critical. It's colored by the interests of the stakeholders. So it's not dictated, to Becky's point. It's colored, it's influenced by it, but they're not necessarily the drivers of it. And it's reached over time. It's not something that you get to, okay, point A, point B, now we're here. It's an evolving state. Creating an outcome, your product is always evolving. The outcomes your users need out of your product will continually evolve. As soon as that becomes static, then someone's going to surpass you. So some examples of outcomes, and they really break into three categories, is outcomes of value creation, things like deeper user engagement, increased retention, higher acquisition rates, higher customer loyalty, the things that really tell you that you're engaging your user base. So those are the outcomes of value creation. Start there. That's where the main focus initially should be. Because if you're creating value, then the next category of outcomes becomes a lot easier. It's the outcomes of value capture. How do you capture and make a value to the business, the value you're creating for your users? So increase revenue, profitability, upsell, cross-sell opportunities, things like that. And then there's outcomes of efficiency, reduce costs, process improvements, cultural changes, things like that. So that's really how to think about outcomes. Outcomes are usually not physically tangible. They're the result of your product existence. They're not your product. The product itself is an output. So we talked about mindset shifts. So you think about some of the differences when you're focusing on outcomes over outputs. So if you focus on outputs, your focus is really on building a solution. Let's get our code checked in. Let's get this tested. Let's do this. That's an output focus of the world. When you focus on an outcome, you focus on solving a problem. You're not wedded to how that problem will be solved. You're wedded to the problem itself. So you're fiercely loyal to solving a problem, not to the solution you think will solve the problem. The effect, if you're focused on outputs, opinions get scattered and fragmented. It's hard to get people aligned. When you focus on outcomes, you'll find this as you first focus on what's the outcome we're all after. Usually you can align on what you're after. Higher user engagement, great. You may argue how to get there, but you can align on where you're going. Impact. So when you focus on outputs, you, in my experience, tend to impact your product plus or minus 10% of its current state. You're not going to create any new seismic changes. But when you focus on outcomes, you focus on new ideas, new ways of achieving the outcome. And then the people who migrate towards or kind of attracted to output-centric approaches, they're more mercenaries. They're more focused on getting their code checked in by a certain time and getting their paycheck on Friday. People who are focused on outcomes tend to be more missionary. Jeff Bezos said that when he was in the early days of Amazon, he wanted missionaries, not mercenaries. And that's really the outcome focus coming through. It's a cultural shift.
So how does this look like at in the Nuber example? So really at this stage, what a product owner, which in this case is Joanna, will be thinking about is what problem is my product trying to solve? So in the past, Joanna would talk with her stakeholders. She'd kind of understand their pain points, maybe understand what they think customers want, and then she'd go off and build it. Might not be right. So it would take, a couple months before she'd get that feedback, and then she'd be continuously tuning her product to try to figure out what customers want. But in this product agility state, what she will do is not just talk to stakeholders, but she'll go through some industry and market analysis, and then she'll talk to actual customers and try to understand the problems that they're facing in their commute, because she is building a rideshare app after all. And so by understanding their problems, customers don't often just come out and say exactly what they need. So she'll have to do a little bit of digging, but she wants to build something that actually solves a problem, not a want, because that's more impactful for the customer. But she'll also talk to the stakeholders as well. And because of the position she's in of talking both with stakeholders and SMEs in her company, as well as customers, she'll be able to have a full view of what the actual problem is that the product should solve. And therefore she can distill that down into what outcomes the product should achieve. And so in this case, the outcomes are to build a better experience for the customer, to provide easier payment for the customer, and to provide a more convenient ride for the customer.
And I think to highlight something Becky just said, there's a big difference between customers, what customers want and what customers need. The need really gets at the underlying outcome they're looking for. What's the underlying problem that's trying to be solved, as opposed to what would you like? Because in my experience, I could tell you exactly what your customers want. They want plus or minus 10% what they currently have, nothing more, nothing less. That's all I ever got when I asked customers what they want. Now, when we probe deeper, and there's this techniques of doing this to understanding the underlying need, that's where the next big thing comes from. That's where innovation comes from. It's by understanding the underlying need. And as a product owner or product organization, you're sitting in the catbird seat getting different understandings of needs from different customers, and you have an omniscient perspective, if you apply it, where you can find new ways to solve these problems that they have. So step two, once we've figured out what the outcomes are and we've built consensus on them, how do we continually reinforce them throughout the organization as we execute? So this, is an exercise we actually go through. We coach teams on this. Yes, if you understand what the overall objective is, it's a multi-year thing, usually provide a better experience for customers as they commute. And this is the case of Uber, right? What might be an annual outcome? Expand customer 5-star ratings. That's clearly the key result. That's the outcome we're after, from 60% to 75%. Then beneath that is a series of sub-outcomes. One of them might be increased in-ride customer satisfaction. What is really important here, those are the higher level things. But once you start dropping to the epic and story level, as a lot of you know, we're getting into execution. So what we work with clients on a lot is make sure you leverage the so that statement in an epic or in a story. And the so that statement really gets into what happens before the so that statement. So as a friendly Uber driver who cannot afford to buy a car, I would like the ability to rent a new clean car from Uber, right? Okay. That's kind of an output, right? The ability to rent a car. Now, so that they can maintain a high level of customer satisfaction for the riders. That's how we continue to reinforce the outcome, the critical outcome, as we go more granularly into execution. So one of the stories underneath that epic might be, as a Uber driver, I'd like the ability to sort through new cars so that, here's the value, I can choose the best car to provide my rider with a clean and safe ride. So at the lower levels, the people who had their hands on the keyboard actually coding should be able to say why they're doing something. What's the outcome that's going to help move the business forward, even though they're just working on an output. So their focus should be more on that outcome. They might have insights that will help inform a better way to get to that outcome.
So in this step, Joanna is wondering how she keeps her team focused on solving problems. So in the past, she would communicate through really outputs. She'd be the middle translating between the stakeholders to the development team, and she would be really just giving a list of features for the development team to execute on, not really solving a problem or providing much context as to why they're solving that problem through a feature. So in this new state of product agility, Joanna will communicate with her stakeholders through outcomes. So sprint demos won't just be focused on velocity and how far progress wise they've made. They'll focus on what the team has experimented with, what they learned, how that will impact the product and impact the customers therefore. And Joanna's product roadmap will be outcomes based and show progress towards the product outcomes. And product progress will be also demonstrated in steering committees towards product outcomes as well. And for the development team, Joanna will write stories, acceptance criteria. She'll really work with the team by explaining outcomes so that the team has space to solve the problems in a way that will impact the customer the most. This provides Rebecca, who's a developer, space to be innovative and create different solutions, different experiments to help drive at the outcome in different lenses so that Joanna can pick the one that will be the most impactful for the customer.
So step 3, identifying success, what we call lagging indicators. The lagging indicators, I think this is best illustrated to one of the products I worked on years ago. I did a lot of work in healthcare. And we were developing an app that worked within the EMR, the electronic medical or HR, and then the health record system that would help physicians better target drug treatment to patients of specific conditions, so that two patients with the same condition, different medical histories would get a different regime based on what the app recommended. And we built it out, and so our outcome was better clinical outcomes. That's what we were looking for. That was our judgment. That was our lagging indicator. What we found when we launched it was that users used it. They used it a lot. They used a lot of repeat usage. All of the indicators that said this is success. But we clicked deeper. We worked with the institutions that used the app to see what were the clinical outcomes of the cases when the app was used, and they weren't any better. The lagging indicators, we had no impact. Now, we were able to actually fix that later, but most teams don't actually look at what's the underlying need, what's the underlying outcome that we're trying to create, and are we measuring that? That's the lagging indicator. That's the hard part. It's not immediate, and we're in a world of immediacy, but that's going to tell you, are you on track? We're going to get back to this diagram in a little more detail in a few minutes.
In step 3, Joanna is trying to understand how to measure the success of her product. So in the past, she would put together a set of metrics to help understand whether or not her product was meeting maybe business objectives and KPIs. But often these weren't measuring the success of the product at meeting the outcomes or the problems that the customer was facing, but instead were really vanity metrics. How many downloads, how well used is how many customers are using the product. So Joanna decides to take the product agility approach and use lagging indicators, which are a bit more longer term, and define success by whether or not the product is meeting the outcomes. And in this way, she'll be able to get feedback to continuously tune her product to continue to make improvements that will benefit the customer and really solve their problem. So you can see for convenience, easier payment, and better experience, she has listed out lagging indicators, which are more longer term focused.
So this step 1, 2, and 3 are very outcome focused. They're really about that first piece we talked about, outcomes over outputs. And what that creates is alignment. If it's done properly, you start to see teams aligning. You start to see business and development aligning, which is hard to do because they can align over the outcomes. The important thing to remember, though, is understanding the outcome and creating the outcome, very, very different things. General Patton once said that if you tell a team where to go, but not how to get there, you'll be amazed at the results. I always like that quote because if you think about from an outcome perspective, where you need to go, that's the outcome. How you need to get there. In his world, the military world, there are too many factors, too many uncertainties to predict exactly how to get there. So you need to inspect and adapt. You need to evolve. You need to rapidly make decisions and pivot to get to where you need to go. So the pathway there, steps 4, 5, and 6 really addresses that. So anytime you identify an outcome, it's going to be, and how, when you start to think about how to make it happen, you're going to make a lot of assumptions. And the reason why 60 to 70% of software built is seldom or never used, it's because the teams made assumptions that were flat out wrong, and they waited too long to validate or invalidate them. A lot of times they didn't validate or invalidate until they released them and found out, no, people aren't going to use it. So the first step is identifying the riskiest assumptions. So an assumption is something that's believed to be true without any direct evidence. And I'm going to talk about evidence as we go through this. But the best, it's a best guess to what we think is going to work. And it's critical that you make assumptions. You have to start somewhere. So assumptions are fine to make in the beginning, but they're lethal if they turn out to be wrong and you didn't pivot away from them. So that's the importance of assumptions. It's not like assumptions bad. Assumptions aren't bad. They just need to be validated or invalidated as quickly as humanly possible. There are really three types. There's desirable, assumptions around desirability. We're assuming that people want this. I call these problem assumptions, right? We're making assumptions about the problem. Is there a problem? Is it pervasive? Viable. That's the next one. If there is a problem, we've validated that from a desirability standpoint. Is there business value in addressing that problem? And then feasible. If it is desirable and we can make money at solving it, can we feasibly do it? Is it something we can do in a cost-effective way? There's an innate hierarchy to these. Desirable first. If it's not desirable, it doesn't matter if it's viable or feasible. If it's desirable but not viable, then it doesn't matter if it's feasible. So you got to think about those things through the lens of desirability, then viability, then feasibility. An example, Dropbox actually did this in their early days, where they looked at it from the perspective of, what are the desirability? What are the assumptions they're making about the problem? People had multiple devices. Well, that's easy today. But back in 08 or whatever year it was that they did, it wasn't as prevalent. So do people want to access the same files across those devices? There's a big assumption. Do people want to keep those files synced? That was one of the first things they looked at. And they started building ways of validating and invalidating those critical assumptions. Once they did that, then they could look at, will people download this? Will people trust the service with important data? Will they understand how it works? And then there's the feasibility. Could they build it? Could they keep things in sync? Could they do it in an effective way? So this is just kind of an example that Dropbox went through. And then this is another example, which is actually from a client. This is real. It's been anonymized, but it's an example of how assumptions can hide in plain sight. So in this case, it was a healthcare company, and we're going into a PI, a program increment. I think we had a half dozen teams, about 60 or 80 developers ready to start cranking on this epic for an entire quarter. But we asked some simple questions about this particular epic. And we quickly found by discussing it that there were 4 major assumptions in this epic where they had no evidence was true. And that was the key. So this was set up to be a pretty tragic program increment. We were quickly able to pivot because we had a month beforehand and do a series of validation and validations. And we were able to validate and invalidate some of the key assumptions that were made. And we ended up changing the direction of the PI based on the assumption validation and validation exercise we did. So one of the things we do in identifying assumptions, we use what's called an assumption identification canvas, where we get a team in all the key business and stakeholders in a room, and we actually have a series of categories. Like it looks like a business model canvas, only we swap out the categories. This is just the categories we use vary based on the business and the client we're in. We have a bunch of different ways of looking at it, but we take, key partners, what assumptions we're making about them, what value assumptions we're making about the value proposition, about customer relationships, about feedback loops, channels to the user, customer segments. And this turns into quite a spirited debate. And we put stickers up on this canvas, red for desirable, yellow for viable and blue for feasible. So we have a kind of a counting of where are our assumptions. It's very usually holistic. And then we move to the next exercise. We then use those assumptions and we map them to this grid, which is importance high versus low on the left, and then uncertainty, low versus high. And we define uncertainty as low uncertainty means there's significant evidence supporting this assumption. High uncertainty means there's little to no evidence supporting this assumption. So what we end up with is a board that looks like this, and that upper right, that's our riskiest set of assumptions. We're constantly asked, how do I prioritize my backlog? How do, is it over value? Is it over easy? Do I use things like weighted shortest job first, things like that? We recommend you do it by risk. Those are your riskiest items. Let's validate those as quickly as possible before we spend significant resources trying to build them.
So how does this look at Nuber? So Joanna is trying to figure out if she's solving the right problems for her customer, and she thinks that she might have made some assumptions when she created a feature Nuber pool, which is essentially carpooling with strangers to get from point A to point B as a ride option on her app. So her and Joshua, like Dan just explained, go through an assumption mapping exercise. They think, maybe customers don't want to ride with other customers. Maybe customers don't like the longer ride associated with that. So they put together all these stickies and then they plot them on a 2x2 matrix of importance and uncertainty. And the ones in the top right, which are highly uncertain and highly important, are assumptions that they want to validate. So they'll go through an exercise with the development team of creating small minimum viable experiments to understand if assumptions were made and how to correct the product.
So that gets us into the next step, which is the validation of those assumptions. And there's lots of different ways to do this. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We talked about Hendrik Nyberg earlier with his concentric circles. He's probably even better known for his MVP diagram, where he draws out a team building a car, right? And in this first instance, he shows one way to do it. You get a tire, you got to connect those tires with an axle, you've got a chassis, and then you got a car. And you've given your users zero value until the very end. That's what it's like to focus on building a solution. Your feedback and user value is delayed, and you don't learn anything along the way. The MVP way is to focus on solving the problem. And solving the problem is, what's the underlying need? The underlying need isn't user needs a car. Underlying need is the user needs to get from point A to point B. So what's the fastest way to do that? Skateboard, right? And then a lot of you probably have seen this. But the idea that we're adding value along the way. So we're addressing the user's underlying need, and we're getting feedback, and we've begun the learning process. We actually took the same idea and broke it out a little differently. If you think about value, and value we define as how well it addresses the user's underlying need over time. That's when the team builds a solution, focus on building a solution, this is what it looks like. Zero value, zero value, zero value. Oh, a ton of value at the end. There's no learning. Where the MVP approach, where you're actually adding value, not significant value with a skateboard, but you are driving value and you'll start to learn. And then over time, you start to, with each MVP, you add more value to the point where the M in MVP begins to fade and you actually have a viable product. The MVE is an important thing to jump out here because a lot of people haven't really had. So first, MVP, minimum viable product. If you go and read all the definitions, and I have, there's many different flavors to it, but in essence, what they say is it's the low effort, high value, right? What's the lowest amount of effort to the highest amount of value we can create? The problem with that is that value is quite often an assumption. It's the biggest assumption of all. It's the desirability assumptions. And those are the ones that will end up costing you the most usually. So an MVP, a minimum viable experiment, looks at low effort and high learning. So a series of MVEs can inform an MVP, so that value is no longer an assumption. So you're testing in little micro tests, little aspects of what you don't know along the way, so that you can inform and build an MVP that truly will add value. So for instance, in the example, to kind of, not to beat the transportation metaphor to death, but an MVP is the skateboard. The second MVP might be, let's motorize it. But how do we do that? Well, we can do some experiments by, how do we connect the motor to the actual skateboard? How do we transfer the power from the backpack? These are all experiments. They're not adding value directly to the user, but they're helping you inform what's going to work for the next MVP.
We jump back to the Nuber example. How does step 5 translate here? So Joanna and her team decided to test out 3 MVEs to understand if the Nuber pool idea is actually benefiting the customer, how they can tweak it to make it more effective. So they test out one MVP on if customers, if they actually want to ride with strangers. They test out a second MVP on if customers mind taking a longer ride, if it's lower cost. And then they test out a third MVP that's purely on whether or not customers want to save money. And for this third MVE, the development team builds a separate button. So when there's surge pricing, they have a button that allows you to accept surge pricing, or a button that allows you to, be notified once surge pricing has dropped. And Joanna is stunned by the results that nearly like 90% of the customers clicked that button. So that really kind of validates that customers want to save money, and that perhaps the Nuber pool idea isn't actually as impactful as implementing a new feature. So she kind of goes back to her assumption mapping exercise, and she realizes that, a lot of her assumptions have been validated. So the stickies kind of move around on the board, and some of them actually move into low importance and low uncertainty. So she's not even going to test those. And she focuses on building this new feature that she would never have known about if she hadn't tested out her assumptions and gone through a few MVEs.
Yeah, and the important thing here is you don't take things off this board, you move them you want to drive things out of the upper right quadrant. And often when you do that, it'll be replaced by other assumptions that tend to get more granular. But you should always be identifying your assumptions and testing them. So step 6 is leading indicators. So we talked about this. We talked about lagging indicators. Leading indicators really are what you're learning quickly. They tend to be, Becky used the term earlier called vanity metrics. You may be familiar with that. I think Eric Ries coined that as part of the Lean Startup. And they're important, but they're only important to indicate whether you're having success. Those are leading indicators. They inform whether you're on track towards creating an outcome, but they aren't the outcome itself. So for instance, an e-commerce website, basically a transaction-based website, some leading indicators might be they do something and page views per user go up, engagement metrics go up. That's great, but those are leading indicators because the outcome that they're looking for is transactional. They want users to buy. They want use repeat buying and things like that. Those are the lagging indicators they'll learn later. So it's really important not to get sucked too into leading indicators and keep them in the context of what they are. They're indications of success. They do not show success.
So if we jump back to Joanna, she is wondering she's wondering if her product is delivering value to her customers. So she decides to use leading indicators while she's still maintaining and measuring her lagging indicators. And in the past, she would have used KPIs. She would have tagged her site or her app after she had gone live. And oftentimes these analytics would measure how much the feature on her on her product was used rather than whether or not the product was used or, whether or not the product was meeting its outcomes. So by using leading indicators, Joanna is able to understand how well the product is being used and how well it's being used towards the outcomes. And she's able to actually make refinements, which lead to new product features. So she's measuring convenience, easier payment, and better experience here. And as you can see, that has led her to be able to create new features to tweak the route algorithm, to add a comment feature, to facilitate customer feedback, and to improve the design of the app when customers are inputting their payment options, so that it's easier and more friction, less friction for the customers.
So the final step, if there's any Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People fans out there, we more or less stole it from him, which is sharpen the saw. The idea being that you need to continually nurture the other 6 steps. You can't turn your back and move to the next step. You've got to continually nurture them. We'll talk about this in a minute, but the idea that step 1, 2, and 3 create alignment. That's really, really important. Steps 4, 5, and 6 enable autonomy. They enable the teams to stay aligned, yes, but to iterate rapidly, to pivot towards those outcomes, to find the best pathway to the outcome without being slowed down. So the alignment of steps 1, 2, and 3 and the autonomy of 4, 5, and 6 are going to have some level of friction, some healthy tension between them. Step 7 is about continually nurturing those. So you may have seen this. This is Spotify, where they look at alignment, high and low on the left, and autonomy, high and low across the bottom. Quite often when we used to do these in person, we have people raise their hand on per quadrant where their companies have, or have they ever worked at a company in the lowest left and the lower right, that type of thing. And believe me, the upper right is by far the least. Very few people ever feel like they're in that type of environment. But so an example of each of these would be, say a team is trying to get somewhere and they're moving along and they come across a river. So in a high autonomy, low alignment environment, leadership might say, hopefully someone's working on that river problem. And the team is thinking, anyone feel like building a log cabin? Where in a high alignment, low autonomy, leadership would basically say, we need to cross the river, build me a bridge. And the team would say, give us the specs. No independent thinking. In a low autonomy, low alignment, leadership would say, I hear running water, and the team would wonder why their feet is wet. With a high alignment, high autonomy environment, leadership is thinking, we need to keep moving to ensure everyone's safety. We'll need to cross the river. By the way, there's a why in there as well. Team, we'll need to figure out the best way to do it. Ferry boats, rope swing bridges, we're not sure. We will keep you updated. That's the high alignment, high autonomy environment. So what we've thrown kind of a lot at you. And one thing as we've done this, there's one thing to get teams to work at a higher level, to really build high impact products by building the right things at the pace of Agile. But what we found is that it's such a mindset shift. You need to learn a new way to do things, yes. But to do that, what we found is it's as much unlearning as learning. People are successful in their jobs at doing what they've been doing. To go in and say, oh, you're doing it wrong, isn't going to work. It's really about looking at learning and unlearning as equal. So we need to unlearn something and fill it with something new, as opposed to just filling more stuff to learn. So an example might be, focusing on velocity, focusing on story points per sprint. That's what people are used to. Output-centric things like output-based roadmaps. So to learn, moving from this obsession with velocity to obsessing over outcomes, that's what really matters. You can deliver twice as much and you go nowhere with your product. And that's quite often what happens. Unlearn the need to be right. That's hard for a lot of people, particularly senior leadership, who's basically made a living on being right. What you need to relearn is how to get it right. It's not about being right, it's about getting it right. That's a big shift in thinking. And then there's the need to be certain, the constant need for certainty. Why do we have output-based roadmaps? Because we're certain we're getting features 6, 7, and 8 in Q3 of next year. We have certainty, yay, we're going to be all set. There's no concept of this, will feature 6, 7, and 8 move us to where we think we need to be. So you need to embrace the uncertainty and leverage that to pivot as you learn and evolve.
If we jump back to Newber and we step into Carol's shoes, she wants to keep her organization aligned in using product agility. So how does she sustain that momentum? She uses the paradigm that Dan just went over of unlearn and learn. So to unlearn using outputs and learn outcomes, she bans in sprint demos, project statuses, and velocity, and instead she requires teams to highlight the experiments they undertook and to describe the key learnings that they learned during that sprint. To unlearn being order takers and learn how to embrace uncertainty and validate assumptions, she requires her product teams to meet quarterly with customers in order to flesh out any assumptions and better understand what problems that they're solving for their customers as that evolves. And then finally, for the organization to unlearn a low alignment, high autonomy, which was Newber before she stepped in and had product agility come to root, and to learn how to continue to innovate and use product agility in the organization. She requires the entire department to do a biannual organization-wide retrospective, during which point team members will bring up processes and other roadblocks that they're facing so that Carol and her team can learn how to use those processes and learn how to embrace this new culture and reorganize the environment so that it sustains this culture.
So really, those are 7 steps that we go through. We've done it with many clients now. We've been evolving it. One of the things, I was doing a lot of this before I came to Slalom 3 years ago. And I would get teams working to the next level, and then I'd walk out the door and they would slip back. How to make this sustainable. When I came to Slalom, I was able to work with organizational effectiveness people who really helped evolve things in a way that makes it sustainable so that it's lasting, it's transformational change. So when Agile isn't enough, if you want to build the right thing, it takes more than just the IT organization. It takes the whole organization to really start driving to building high impact products. So I'm just going to leave you with, and of course we'll take questions, but some things that I was once asked, what can I start doing tomorrow to make some of this stuff happen? And no matter what what you were doing in the organization. But one of the things that I know I started doing is schedule recurring user interactions with teams. So you could do it every 2 weeks so that that the users that the teams are interacting with users every 2 weeks. That's going to change their focus. Require learning readouts from the teams so that, what did they do? So instead of a sprint demo where they show you what they did, first question, what did you need to understand better going into the sprint? What did you learn during the sprint? And based on what you learned, what are you going to do differently next? Let you start asking those questions at a sprint demo and basically downplay a deliverable. Not that you ignore it. Great, let them show it. Let them feel good about what they built. But what did they learn? Because learning is really the learning towards the outcome is really what matters the most. Another thing that we've done, recommended, is an aspirational dashboard. Everyone is so metrics driven. So if we are successful in creating this outcome, what does success look like? Let's make a dashboard that looks like that. When I was in industry, I led a couple product teams. And one of the things we did was create mythical dashboards that showed we were successful, just to paint the picture of kind of begin with the end in mind. What surprised me is that the team printed them out and hung them on their team rooms. And they kind of created kind of a true north. But little things like this start to shift the focus away from this output centric focus and more towards the value of outcomes, the value of the journey towards the outcome, embracing the uncertainty and evolving towards those outcomes. So, Becky, did you want to talk about the other mentee?
In the spirit of product agility and helping Dan and I validate our assumptions on what parts of this was most impactful for you and your organization, if you wouldn't mind taking another chance at looking at the mentee and filling out which part of this presentation was most impactful for you.
And we'd be happy to take questions. Apologies, we threw a lot at you.
Folks have any questions? You go ahead, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
I had a quick question. So one thing that always interests me about the diagram where they go from a skateboard to to a scooter to a bike to a motorcycle to a car or whatever, is that if you start that, you probably end up being a manufacturer of skateboards, because once you have some success, you don't necessarily build on to the next thing, right? So that's been a common issue for businesses always, in not disrupting their own market once they have a market, right?
Yep.
So what do you put into your work in order to stop that, to continue progression on the customer problems and or not solidifying around a solution once it finds some market success?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's, one of the effectiveness of that particular graphic. It's really graphically strained. It's and that's what makes it really drives the point home. But yeah, you can punch holes in it because you realize, that okay, if you're really building a physical product, it's probably not going to work. Let me give you a kind of an example I experienced, which is really eye-popping for me. I was the lead of a product, an IT website called Network World. This is about 15 years ago. And I noticed that whenever we published an article, this is, basically people go there to learn about networking equipment. We didn't make anything. We were just an editorial entity that specialized in networking equipment. And whenever we published an article that had to do with people, how to buy a server or router or things like that. This is pre-cloud days, so it was pretty vibrant area. Traffic would fly, would pop up to those articles. So we made an assumption that people really wanted to learn about buying. So someone proposed that we build buyer's guides. And we proposed that, and management said no, because that advertisers would hate that and we would lose all our advertisers. So what we did was, without even asking, we just put in the we clustered articles that, that help people learn how to buy servers, how to buy routers, we clustered them together, and we put in the navigation links, looking to buy a server, looking to buy a router, question mark, and if you click on it, you go to that. It took an hour to do that, and traffic flowed and really flowed to it. And something else interesting happened is that a couple of advertisers, our biggest advertisers, saw it and contacted us, and they weren't mad. They wanted to sponsor those areas, and it opened up a whole new revenue stream. So we did that small thing. We learned, we got some validation. We put more resources in. It got bigger, more revenue. We then got editorial involved to actually write to it, and it turned into buyer's guides, which became a major source of revenue over time for the organization. So think about what's the minimal thing you can do. And what we did was, unbeknownst to us at the time, we were testing at first desirability. And then as that was substantiated, there was a viability element as we tested more and more. So does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions from anybody?
But to me, the biggest shift is, and it's having what a lot of people call the product mindset. To me, a product mindset is a team focused on solving a problem, not building a solution. And that can be pretty jarring way to think about it, but that's really what it's all about. When you're solving a problem, your head is up, you're looking at constant feedback, trying to learn from what you're doing. When you're building a solution, you're assuming what you're doing is right, your head is down, you're cranking on code. You're getting it checked in and you're moving on to the next thing. So it's not just a play on words, it's a completely different way of thinking.
Fantastic. Last chance for any questions you might have for Dan and Becky. I really do appreciate it. I like the way you were bouncing back and forth between you explaining the structure and then like the case study you were sharing with us. That was impactful. That helped drive it home.
Yeah.
At least for me.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but it's hard. And it's
Right.
hard to do. But I appreciate everyone's attention. And feel free to reach out with questions on LinkedIn. People do it all the time. I actually enjoy that. So
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for coming. You should have a survey. Please send us your feedback. The QR code is there also if you want to snap that. You can take it right now. Drop in any desires you have for future. Wait, I want your needs, not your wants. I need your needs. If I got that right. Okay. So yeah, do that please and watch for those invites for the upcoming sessions. All right. Dan and Becky, thanks. Everybody have a great night.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Yeah.